So I wanted to ask you, your piece is called Lullaby for Those Fast Asleep, right? And so I wanted to find out more about that title.
Mm-hmm. So lullabies are usually sung to babies or children who are about to fall asleep. But then, like with everything that's happened this year, with a lot of a lot happened this year. Like it's like been very unfortunate, and like a lot of people have lost their lives. And I wanted to write a piece that sort of remember those who lost their lives from COVID or any other events that happened this year. So like I wanted to dedicate my piece to that.
Oh, that's beautiful. And your piece is, I love your piece. It's beautiful. I've had a lot of fun learning it with Gloria. And so tell me a little bit about the lullaby it's actually based on.
Uh-huh. So it's a very famous lullaby from Korea. So it's called The Baby from an Island. And basically the mom leaves home to go pick oysters, I think. Yeah, oysters. And the baby's alone at home, left, and he's crying, or just like being alone. But then the eventually he hears the sound of the waves from the ocean, and that becomes the lullaby for the baby, and like he falls asleep at the end, waiting for his mom to return.
You know that middle section when you have the piano going with the it's like the waves, right?
Uh-huh.
That's been going around in my head. I hear like your piece, snippets of it. I'll
Mm-hmm.
be walking my dog or whatever, and I hear snippets of it. And that section just
Mm-hmm.
kind of is so full and exciting.
Yeah, like I really like the imagery of like one baby just like staying at home, but like hearing the waves come at the baby, like the sound of it. And like I really wanted to like depict that in the piece. And yeah, I'm really glad that you like that section.
So why did you choose the piano as my duo partner?
So I think a lot in like harmonic terms when I compose, and piano, of course, is like the richest to provide the harmony for a single line instrument. And I figured like with the piano, it could still have the intimacy of the solo violin feature, but still like have a lot of different textures under and above. And yeah, I also just love writing for like solo instrument plus piano. So yeah.
There's uh when you start off with the piano by itself, I love that octave,
Uh-huh.
the ethereal feeling of it, and then you bring it out back at the end.
Mm-hmm.
So when you compose like that, do you have images in your head um, that
Yeah,
you?
absolutely. Like especially with this piece because I knew I wanted to base the piece on this lullaby. So I had like this image of the baby being alone, the ocean, and also based on the conversations that we've had, I had like certain like moods and like emotions that we talked about in the piece. So like I wanted to start a little bit simpler and then like develop into it and then like end with sort of like the same sort of like feeling from the beginning but like different.
Hmm. Yeah, we talked a lot about identity,
Right.
right? And being Asian,
Yes.
and and where is home, right? What feels like home?
Right.
So tell me a little bit about your background.
Mm-hmm. So I came to America when I was 14. Yeah. So I've actually been away from home for exactly half of my life. I'm 28 now. And um, uh, so like for me, home has been a little bit like confusing because when I'm in America, I'm a foreigner, I'm Korean. But then when I go back to Korea, people somehow notice that I have been away, the way that I speak or like the way that I like behave, they can tell that something is a little different about me. So um, even just like 10 years ago, I had this like really hard like time trying to figure out who I am, where I belong, where my home is. I always felt a little bit uncomfortable about my identity. But then as I got more developed as a composer and like trying to like find my own compositional voice, I figured out that it's actually much cool that I don't have a set identity, but I'm more like this like hybrid. You know, I'm Korean. I also have like a lot of like American culture like embedded in me because I've like grown up here, I've studied here, and and I think this sort of like combination of both cultures gives me like a chance to become like something totally different from like a lot of other people. And even when I was growing up in Korea, we moved a ton. I went to 4 different elementary schools, and like the
Oh,
longest,
wow.
yeah, the longest time I spent at a house might have been like 2 years or something. Like my parents loved moving, and so even when I go back home, sometimes I'll show up with my 2 suitcases, and it'll be a completely different place that like my parents take me to.
You've had to be very flexible ever since you were
Definitely.
little.
Yes, definitely. I mean, like having to make like new friends almost like every other year, like I think it was pretty challenging at first, but then it was also like a really fun thing because I never knew what to expect. And then I think that's what made me a little bit more adventurous in the long run.
Huh, that's interesting. I think, well, so do you feel like here in America, do you feel like, a lot of Asians feel like they're perpetual foreigners, like always, because you've spent a lot of time here, many, many years here. So there's a part of you that feels like you're American,
Yeah.
right? But when people
Hmm.
first see you, or I
Right.
mean,
It's
when
like
they
right
see,
there. Right.
right, right, and assume that that's not the typical idea of what an American looks like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like, so I got my orchestra piece performed by the Minnesota Orchestra earlier this year, and that piece is very American. Like, it was about New York. It was also based on this like theme from like a comedy show, um, from Adult Swim. So like, it has all these like, I mean, it almost has like Gershwin like American in Paris sort of like feel to it. It's like a lot of like jokes and like a lot of energy. But then because the program had my name and it said that I was from Korea, even though it has nothing of like me being Korean in it. I mean, of course it does because I wrote it, but I don't necessarily think it sounds Asian. But one like audience member came to me after the performance and said that like he could really hear the Asian influence in my music, which like puzzled me a little bit, like because to my ear I don't think there was like anything that was so like outwardly Korean or Asian in the music. But like I think it's sometimes really interesting to see what they know about the composer like determines like what they're gonna hear even before they hear it. And yeah, so I heard that comment and I thought it was actually pretty interesting. Like I wasn't offended or anything, so I was like, oh, thank you. But
That story epitomizes what just the kind of uh, the initial reaction when somebody sees like us
Mhm.
and us making assumptions about
Yeah.
us, right?
Right.
Automatically, without
Mhm.
really getting to know who we are.
Right.
That
And like
story epitomizes. That's incredible. I
and like
I remember, I heard that. I think I heard some of your piano pieces are also that way, influenced with the jazz and
mhm.
um, the energy was really what spoke to me when I was listening to your music. And I was listening to so many of the composers from Gabby's Academy,
Mhm.
and I remember the energy and the humor
Right.
and the variety and textures that drew me to your music. And
Mhm.
so I'm really happy you mentioned this piece that Minnesota Orchestra they premiered it this year, earlier this year.
So they performed it. It was actually premiered at Aspen like 2 years prior to
Oh,
that.
Okay.
That piece actually has been played like 3 times now, which is cool because usually I write the piece and then I hear it once and that's it.
Yeah,
So
it's always great to see it take a life, right?
definitely,
Have
yeah.
a life. Well,
And also, like in like the Western composition world, like female composer is still like a new thing. Like there are more numbers now, but like female composers, we're still like new concept, and there aren't as many of us. So me being a female composer and being Korean, it definitely adds to that like identity thing. I felt that when I first went to Juilliard, for example, like there were only like 3 girls in the forum, like composition seminar. So I felt really kind of scared to speak because if I spoke, everyone would know that it's like one of the girls, you know? But then, like, eventually I found that that was like something great about me, you know? I stand out. Like, it doesn't have to be like a negative thing that I stand out. But like once I embraced that, like I was different, I think I was able to do more things in my music and also like the way that I carried myself as well. So yeah.
that takes strength. Maybe the fact that you moved around so much and
Hmm.
had to adapt gave you
Def-
that strength, because I think that kind of challenge silences a lot of people.
yes.
Yeah, it could react and shrink away instead of finding your own 2 feet and
Mhm.
celebrating the fact that, hey, I'm different than the demographic, the usual demographic, and so I have that platform I can use to speak, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
But what, like, so you must have encountered challenges though, frustration, having just from having that kind of prejudice against women composers and being Korean.
I've had incidences where I would get an opportunity, like a really great opportunity for my piece or, like a new commission or something. And like people would be happy for me. But then, like, I would also hear that, oh, yeah, like you got that because you're Asian, because you're a female composer. And that's so demeaning, Like, I would want to think that I got it because of what I do and like because of the piece that I submitted. Like, yeah, so like it can be like an uncomfortable thing for me to like talk about, but I think it's also like good to like say that like it's fine to be a female composer, like what's wrong with that? And there are like more and more female composers, like there are several at Rice now too, and like we have a very tight community, we support each other. Like there's a younger female composer who's a sophomore this year, and like I've asked her to write like short pieces for like my other projects that I have, and like I think it's just like really good to like have this community.
We do need to support each other,
Oh,
really. I
absolutely.
think it's
Yeah.
true.
you know
Mm-hmm. I do find, um, from my perspective, the organizations I'm with, that the least represented demographic are Asian composers, Asian female composers,
that
actually.
is true. Yeah.
You know, I mean, we have a lot of Asians in classical music as musicians, but in terms of representing the composers, there are very few, if any,
Hmm.
that I remember in my tenure as an orchestral musician, um, that of Asian female composers, and there's so many now that are
Yeah.
really wonderful
Hmm.
um, voices that need to be heard, and um, it's kind of an interesting um, thing to observe now, especially with in light of all that's happening. You kind of open your eyes up and see, oh, there are issues all over the place.
Hmm.
I think a lot of times, because there are so many Asian musicians, that I've heard people say, oh, it's not really uh, a problem for Asians in classical music, but I see it with
Right.
composers and in subtle ways, which in a
Hmm.
way is harder to um, overcome because they are subtle, and even Asians don't feel like
Right.
there's that problem. So
Yeah, but also like having uh given this like opportunity to become a composer as a Asian female person, like it's a new phenomenon, new-ish. Like even 100 years ago, like women didn't have much opportunities given in Korea, for example. Like it was like a new thing. And to be exposed to like Western classical music too, like it's fairly like recent thing that like I feel like it is kind of natural that like there haven't been many so far, but like hopefully there are more opportunities to hear different types of composers from all over the world.
yeah, I do find it problematic when people program women composers, and it really reeks of, oh, we're doing this because we need to have a female composer on this program.
Yeah.
That really doesn't help the cause.
And I feel really conflicted about like opportunities like that because I have definitely been like commissioned and like programmed because of who I am. But at the same time, like that's still a performance and that's still an exposure for me that like even though I'm like like I wish I could be just a composer, not an Asian composer or female composer, but at the same time like people still get to hear my music because of this, and I think you know it's okay. Better than nothing.
You can't turn your nose up at opportunity, right?
Exactly.
That's true. That's true.
Mhm. Yeah, and
Well,
like like somebody has to make a point to like diversify it, and like I guess this is very efficient way of doing it. Let's just have a concert with all female composers and see what happens.
so you've written for ballet, actually.
So I've actually done three dance pieces. So I did the first one that I did was at Juilliard, and that one was more like a contemporary dance type of piece, and it was a mix ensemble piece. And the second piece I did was with a choreographer from the Stuttgart Ballet. Through New York CLA, they have a collaboration program for young composers and young choreographers. So we were paired together for that project, and I wrote a piano quintet for that one, and that was just such a fun experience for me. I love how because like when we write music, it is so abstract. Like I try to create some sort of like image through sound, but like that doesn't really work. Like I can like explain a lot, I can like try to make it sound like waves, but is it really waves? But then
I
like to
think you did a really good job with that in your
thank
piece
you.
for our project. Waves. It really does feel like water.
Awesome. That's good. But yeah, so seeing like my music through body movements, like it was just so fascinating and just so exciting. And so the choreographer showed the piece to the Stuttgart Ballet in Germany, and they liked the piece. So I got another commission to work with them on another piece, and that was for a string quintet. And that was so I wrote that piece when I was in Los Angeles, and I was just like going through a lot of different changes at the time. And so I wrote a piece where yeah, it has a lot of like surprises and like a lot of different like episodes, and he wanted to focus on having different types of like duets. So he wanted to like structure the piece around 5 different duets. So I had introduction, 5 duets, so 5 different sections, and then the ending. And I really like working with choreographers because I get to choose the timing and like the mood and like a lot of like what happens in the dance production. But then I almost become like the background of it when it gets performed.
Huh.
Yeah, because like visual aspect is like so much more, like so much closer to the audiences, that like music almost becomes like the background thing.
How
I
did
think.
you know how slow? Would you be told a tempo for each
Mhm.
section, or would you, um, or would they later say, "Oh, we actually need our movements to be slower, and the music needs to slow down here," or um, uh, what came first? I guess the music came first, really, and then the choreography. Or
Yes. So that's also what's interesting. So I also worked on opera that year. And opera is the exact opposite, because even though the music is like in the front when it gets performed, I actually don't get to say a lot in the timing of events, because libretto has to come first.
I
So like that was like a really interesting comparison for me, because for the dance piece, I got to make a lot of choices and decisions before anything happened. Like
ah,
I had like visions in my head, and then I wrote the music, and then I'll like check with the choreographer if this works or not. But usually, because like I'm like sending in midis, it's also hard to tell, you know. So he because we had also worked together before, he just like trusted me on it, and we thought that it would just work out. And so what we did though is we came up with like a pretty clear timeline of certain durations of each section.
I see.
Mm-hmm. And then I could like change textures, or like I could pretty much do whatever I wanted within those like different sections.
Mm.
And but for the opera, of course, like I had like some comments and like things that I wanted to happen, but then like once the libretto was given, that was the timing and that was the set frame, and I had to like try to like maneuver it within that.
I see. So you would
Uh-huh.
have the libretto in hand, and then
Yes.
you would write to that.
Mm-hmm. But then for the dance, they would already have the music. The musicians would show up with the parts and score. I mean, you know how it goes, like you have to practice. Like not much can change once like it's on the stand, and the choreographer just has to like figure it out, which is like also really so fascinating, because the choreographer that I worked with, um he's an Italian choreographer. He's also a dancer, and he's just such a musical person, but he doesn't read music. So everything is like by ear. And the way that they count is so interesting, because like my music, I'm sure like I mean you've seen like it has a lot of like meter changes and pulse
Right.
changes, but like they count everything in 4 or 8.
Oh no.
But like it worked. I didn't really understand how they were doing it, but they would just do it like 1, 2, 3, 4, or like something like that. But it's so not in 4, but the entire piece was in 4 when they were thinking about it.
That's amazing to me.
I know. I was so blown away when this happened. And so the things that they would listen for, like for us, we would like listen for like different entrances, or like certain cues, but they would listen for like almost like sound effects. They would listen for like, okay, like there's a really like big pizzicato here, and that's when things happen,
Huh.
or like tremolo, like things like that. So the way that they communicated was so different from like what I was used to. And yeah, like I just loved like collaborating with dancers and like seeing everything happen right there with the music. And like not a lot of it is written down these days for choreographers. A lot of them are just like videotaping it, and like the way that they learn and memorize these movements, it's incredible. Yeah.
But thank you. Anything coming up that you want to share with us?
Yeah. So I think I've written like 4 cello solo pieces this year so far, and I still have more to write. And I actually just got a commission from the Musica Houston to write a string quartet, which I've always wanted to write, and that should be done by March 15th, and it will be. And it's gonna be recorded at the Modern Arts Museum in Houston. So I'm super excited about that. And I recently finished an orchestra piece for the Orchestra of St. Luke's. And that was supposed to be premiered in June, but then I got more time to write it since the pandemic happened and everything got pushed. So hopefully I hear that sometime in the spring or before summer.
Wow, that's awesome. That's terrific.
Thank you.
Well, good luck with all that.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining me on this project. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I've loved writing for you and like it's been just so awesome.
Oh, thank you, Nikki.
Thank
Appreciate it.
you.